Hello again, CB Universe fans. This is Dragon Videos, ready to present another top 10 episodes from CB Universe Season 2 series. However, I decided to go without my spell book for this list, mostly because of all the magical shenanigans I really don't want to deal with. Also, I thought it would help kill the time of when Season 6 is about to announce. I know, the hiatus is pure torture. Yep, once again folks, we're stuck in another hiatus. I hope it's not a long one. Even though it was so exciting seeing what happened in the Steven Universe movie, I definitely want to see more of what they're going to go in terms of the story. Now, I would be good either way if they're going to do 14-year-old or 16-year-old Steven. I also wanted to recognize that Season 2 was a little bit of a character arc for Pearl, though I really also like the idea of how they do further concepts with the characters and make the story more interesting. So, here we are, the next list of Season 2. Oh Lord, why did I have to go here? Abandoned hospitals really are creepy. Heck, even regular hospitals just seem to have an eerie setting at night. Usually, for many of you horror movie aficionados, it usually involves ghosts or sometimes psychological monsters that will appear out of nowhere and then try to kill you. In the number 10 Steven Universe Season 2 episode, I thought it would be appropriate because of the thrills and chills as well as Connie's character development. You see, Nightmare Hospital begins with Steven returning Connie home after training with Pearl and decides to give her Rose's sword. However, that didn't last long when Mrs. Maheshwan, or Dr. Maheshwan, found out about it. It was not pretty. And then she had to return to the hospital because of a supposed patient, quote-unquote patient, that showed up. And then it turns out those patients were nothing more than gem mutants. It wasn't before long it turned into a major horror flick that scared the crime out of Connie, Steven, and Dr. Maheshwan. It was also by then that Connie decided to tell the truth about her eyes being healed, all the sword fighting in secrecy she did, as well as confronting her mother about all the overbearingness that Dr. Maheshwan put on. Dr. Maheshwan thought she knew everything about her daughter. In reality, she didn't, which is what I liked about this episode a lot. Even though it was a bit scary and Halloween appropriate, I felt it was a highlight for Connie, able to having the guts to stand up to her parent as well as expressing how she feels. And in a lot of ways it's relatable to kids who had a hard time voicing their opinions. Well, since we've got a lot of work to do, Oh, criminy! What the heck? Okay, who turned on my anti-spoiler siren here? I really don't need this. Come on now. Stop that! Donna, where is the button? Where's the fail-safe system? Come on! Turn off! I really wish I had my spell book now for this one. Thank you! Apparently, it really is annoying when things don't work for you, and sometimes it can be out of someone else's own ill intentions. In number 9, I decided to do Cry for Help. Basically, it starts off with Steve and the rest of the gang realizing that Peridot was using the communication hub to do the TVs, or causing the interference in the TVs. So the crew went over and it was confirmed that Peridot repaired the communication hub. So for a time, Amethyst thought that they would form Sugalite. Garnet, however, and I do like this part because it really shows that they learned from their mistakes, was that Garnet realized she was not thinking it was a good idea, mostly because she can be brash and Amethyst can have a tendency to be reckless. So Garnet just finally decided to do a fusion with Pearl, which makes Pearl very excited. So they decide to do their first ever fusion dance. And I know that a lot of fans were excited to see this unique chemistry going on. And I put this at number 9 because it features one of my favorite fusions, Sardonyx. And one of the things I do like about her is just her upbeat personality. She's like the female version of Jimmy Fallon. Heck, you would probably never needing a cup of coffee when she's around. And of course she dismantles the hub with nothing more than a mere warhammer. And with great precision, that was for sure. Steven was practically blown away, as well as the rest of us, which was a great benefit for Pearl. But for Amethyst, this was hard for her to swallow. I mean, can you blame her? She's always so insecure, and having to be rejected and not being fused with Garnet really put a dampened spirit on her. It was by then that weird things began to happen. The hub kept being repaired. It wasn't until Steven and Amethyst learned that Pearl did it so she could fuse with them, and Amethyst exposed the truth right before Garnet, which resulted in a huge fight between the two and the formation of Sugilite and the temporary return of her. Unfortunately, this episode ends with the Garnet and Pearl being distant from one another, fuming and filled with regret. I put this again for number 9 because I just didn't like how the plot went, but I liked the appearance of Sardonyx. Quick question, how many of you still remember Sweet Dreams from the song Beyonce? And how many of you recall episodes and cartoons where the characters would go from one dream to another? Well, in my number 8, I decided to do this one, most because 1, it features Lapis, and 2, it also gives us more intrigue into Steven's powers and how they work. In Chilitide, the crew was still trying to search for the gems, Jasper, and Lapis Lazuli. However, it proved less than successful, which resulted in everyone deciding, okay, let's call it quits, time for bed. Well, the gems try not to show that, but let's face it, just because they don't need to poop doesn't mean they're tired. So Steven, Pearl, and Amethyst decide to sleep, and Steven starts to have a dream that gives you that familiar air of the 1930s, 1950s, as well as the 1980s sitcoms we used to watch all the time. However, that dream slowly started to turn into a nightmare when we start to witness one of the most terrifying body horror we've ever witnessed. Lapis literally crying her eyes out, and this is tame compared to the next body horror. Now, of course, at first Steven shrugs it off, but then it happens again. Upon learning from this through Pearl, he goes back to sleep and soon learns that Lapis is trying to fight with her dear life, trying to protect him from Jasper, and of course, making herself a prisoner. Although it was still a sad outcome for it all, it was still a horrible wake-up call for the rest of us that there was still a job to do, and that whatever's going to happen to Lapis, we prayed for a happy ending. Which is why I put this in number 8, because it was such a serious tone episode, and it was good to see Lapis again. Okay, none of you may find this as a surprise of this being number 7 on the list. The answer was well written, as well as I found it very interesting of how Garnet came to be. So the episode of course begins with Steven waking up to his birthday, and as promised, Garnet decided to talk about how she came to be, though it was kind of a bummer that she never got to show it right from the get-go. Thanks a lot, Jasper. Anyway, Garnet decides to narrate the story of how she became a permafusion in the process. Who knew it all started with Blue Diamond coming down to Earth after a group of rowdy rebel gems had been disrupting the colonization process of Earth. And for a while, she began talking to Sapphire. This was also a personal debut of Blue Diamond herself, which really brought on more of an edge to how the Diamond Authority worked. And so we see Ruby and Sapphire being a little awkward around each other at the beginning, but then things start to take a serious tone. Ruby, refusing Sapphire's acceptance of fate, leaped in at the last second in the most heroic knight style, which I did like seeing, thus resulting in the fusion. And Sapphire, out of the blue, decided to save Ruby in return for saving her. This resulted in, well, what seemed to be a bit of an awkward relationship. They were still trying to understand of what was happening to them and how they became a fusion immediately. And they weren't the only ones. When Garnet finally met up with Rose Quartz, the very gem that nearly killed them, well, they soon learned that it was okay for them to be themselves, and that they were the answer to why Ruby jumped and why Sapphire disrupted the track of fate. Again, this is one of the few unique romance stories. We should hear it more often. Remember what I said earlier about the body horror and that Lapis was the ink? True, we've had the mention of Gemmunes in Nightmare Hospital, but in the debut, they were a whole lot scarier, especially for Garnet and Steven, which is why I put this in number 6, because it was both terrifying and interesting at the same time. Keeping it together was true to its title in more ways than one, usually with Garnet. So it begins with the crew doing some chores as well as speculating what to do next with Peridot since they found her ship. They managed to find her in the Alpha Kindergarten, or in this case, Steven did, and there was a little bit of an awkward moment, and Peridot giving off one of the funniest lines ever. Are the others with you? Steven nods, refusing not to lie. And she said, of course, why not? And I'm pretty sure you know what happened after this. The gems chased after her, and Peridot was not without being armed. She practically had to use her finger lasers just to escape, and then had to use her helicopter form just to escape from their grasp. While Pearl and Amethyst went after them, Steven and Garnet decided to investigate what she was doing. They thought it was nothing. Boy, were they wrong. Turns out, these were horrific experimentations of the Shattered Gems, resulting in horrible fusions. Garnet being a fusion herself, this was a nightmare beyond all extremes. Basically, these gems were forced to fuse together, and this literally caused Garnet to fall apart over this. Temporarily, thank goodness, which managed to fight back the monster in turn. But upon this revelation, Garnet was torn to pieces over this, the fact that so many gems were destroyed because of their existence. So, for a while, Steven and Garnet were at peace with that, but at the same time, it gave off that horrible, ominous sense that there's still yet to come. Sailing, sailing over the ocean blue. Criminy, I got lost in all of this. Well, technically, this is true because the next episode is basically friendship. Both literally, if not physically. So it starts off picking up with the tension between Pearl and Garnet after that stunt she pulled back in the Sardonyx week. And of course, Amethyst suggests that they should figure out what to do next after trying to catch Peridot once more. It soon leads them to an abandoned spacecraft which Peridot had managed to use to trap them against their own will. and Pearl thought she could go against Peridot. Apparently, she was wrong, which soon resulted in both her and Garnet being trapped, and it was even getting harder for them to get forgiveness. But Garnet and Pearl both confessed their feelings. Pearl liked Garnet because she was a wonderful relationship, and Garnet looks to Pearl for strength because being a leader is never easy. Over time, they soon overcame that difference and formed Sardonyx for a little while. Then, Peridot once again had to escape, but before they could, they formed a chain and kind of destroyed her foot in the process. It resulted in a foot joke, but I picked this in number 5 because of how they fixed the relationship between the two, as well as seeing Sardonyx once again. Okay, for this spot, I decided to do a double header, mostly because 1, they go hand in hand, and 2, these episodes were actually what inspired me to go back into watching Steven Universe again after only seeing bits and pieces of it in season 1. So the story begins with Steven polishing up his gem and going straight to bed after his usual bedtime rituals. I have to admit, it was kind of cute where he said good night to all of his stuffed animals. Good night, Happy Bear. Good night, Sad Bunny. Good night, Playful Kitty. Good night, Ominous Triangle at the foot of my bed. Wait, what? It was by then that I was completely shocked at that Peridot would actually come to Steven's house, practically risking her gem just to go straight into the lion's den. She practically threatened him because she was desperate to get off of Earth, and for reasons we had yet to learn. And she also left that ominous message through her mental breakdown. It's not going to be like anything soon. And I have to admit, in that scene, I felt a little bad for Peridot, as well as thinking, is this the same gem who was trying to kill the crew earlier? Before long, the gems find her, and then finally, after chasing her throughout the majority of the season, they finally pooped her. Which turns out, in my personal shock, was that these living hamsters weren't part of her. It turns out she was smaller than that, and Steven had to find out what the heck was going on. So, of course, through her reformation, she became a cute little angry slice of pie, and telling him a little bit of a cluster, she got through the door, only to be intercepted by the crystal gems once again, resulting into the chase into the bathroom. And Peridot tried to escape the toilet, but to no avail. Since then, she had to get stuck into Steven's bathroom. Poor Steven. My favorite line of that one, "What's with you guys and making me pee outside?" So, before long, Peridot became very vulnerable, which is why I put this at number 4, because this is definitely where I see a more vulnerable side to the robotic personality that we normally see with Peridot. She finally broke down, and we finally learned a little bit more about Homeworld. So, with Winter Reigns, this is where we get to learn more about Peridot's vulnerability and the blooming relationship between her and Steven. So, the crystal gems tried to negotiate, but it didn't go so well. Peridot still hung out in the bathroom, and Steven was admiring of how much it was raining. When she heard the thunderclap, Peridot freaked out, which was probably one of my favorite scenes in this episode. And then, when Peridot finally got the courage to go outside thanks to Steven's help, she was a bit overwhelmed at the concept of what she was seeing. It was both nostalgic and calming. So, with Steven's convincing, Peridot finally decided to show him what the projects were about. Apparently, it's this thing called a cluster, a huge mutated gem in the earth that would cause everything to explode. So, the Peridot was reluctant to actually take on the gems and tell them all this, but it wasn't until the mutants attacked her and Steven that it was a huge wake-up call for her. Steven can only do so much after all, and Peridot, in her shining moments, stood up for Steven and then decided to work with the crystal gems, much to her chagrin. had to put this episode on my list, mostly because of Peridot's blooming relationship as she's opening up the crystal gems, and also because I do like the relationship with Amethyst and Peridot. So Peridot begrudgingly helps Pearl and the others out, and for a while it was going okay until she decided to insult Garnet's fusion, which resulted in her in being tied up like a dog. And she was not happy about it. And of course, as Garnet liked to put it, her having a run of a place for me is making me incredibly uncomfortable, which resulted in her having to take the punishment for it. She did some bad jokes which made Amethyst laugh, and for a while, as they were trying to get the drill head, they were having a blast until Peridot went too far this time, saying up how wrong that Amethyst was, and that she was supposed to be a Jasper and not a puny runt. So this really upsets Amethyst up to the point where she was ready to nail Peridot down. But they managed to get the drill head in, and later on the drill head went way out of control. Peridot managed to save Amethyst, but it resulted in a very awkward moment, which is also resulting of the ship. So after that, Peridot, which is probably one of my favorite parts of the scene, finally had the courage to apologize for what she did, as well as developing a stronger relationship with Amethyst. This is a good character arc for her, as well as the fact that even though she's using a tape recorder to apologize, it's a good start. Okay, I admit I've been using a lot of Peridot-based episodes for the majority of my list. One, she's kind of one of my favorite crystal gems, and two, I felt like Season 2 was the best of her character arc, as well as her character development. Log date 7152 also highlighted one of the favorite pairings I have yet to see, which was Garnet and Peridot. So it begins Peridot with writing a simple journal entry, calmly explaining things. Psych! Actually, her mind was practically deteriorating after the events in, I will not say, but she really was overcome with the realization of what she did, and now that she was an official crystal gem, she didn't know what to do with herself. Stephen got curious after Garnet took her over, so Stephen began listening to the diary, and we learned of how she got the tape recorder introduced to Camp Pining Hearts, which I had to admit was very interesting that she fell in love with the show, and of course learning how to do jokes, which would make sense after her bombing with Amethyst. So Peridot also had to learn. Poor Greg, he was the last person who had to deal with this sort of stuff, which I had to admit was kind of funny if not shocking at the same time. This is also where Garnet kind of showed a highlight to herself in trying to understand Peridot, and Peridot trying to understand Garnet, as well as the concept of fusion. This was a great Garnet and Peridot episode because this is definitely where we get to see Garnet being a motherly figure other to Stephen. She begins to help Peridot give a better understanding about herself, as well as what fusion is. It's more than just a mere weapon. It's also representing a close, positive, healthy relationship if done right. So again, this definitely shows a lot of how much Peridot had changed through the series. Out of all the episodes featuring Peridot, this one was by far my favorite, if not the best highlight of her character development. Message received really was a huge cliffhanger for me, if not a suspenseful one. So it begins from It Could Have Been Great, where Stephen confronts Peridot, and then Stephen learns a little bit more about Yellow Diamond being in the worship ideal, that she was an efficient decider of the universe. So Peridot really was loyal and would do anything to serve her diamond, although Stephen Peridot outsmarted her and trapped her in the car with the most funniest words, "Save your strength. You're going up against Earth's greatest technologies, the child safety lock." Stephen, feeling betrayed by all this, showed the communication device to the gems. They were also upset about it too because they would bond to Peridot in more ways than one. They were a bit relieved that Stephen got away from her. But it was short-lived, the moment that Peridot literally crashed the bond and then took off with the communication. Amethyst, being upset about this, formed into a helicopter. The funniest line in that one was, "Yeah, that's right, you can feel bad all the way to the temple," which resulted in a face from Stephen. They managed to catch up to her, but they were too late. Peridot was already giving the phone call to none other than Yellow Diamond. And I had to admit, this episode was again my favorite because we got to see the diamonds for the first time, not including the little flashback we had with Blue Diamond. So Yellow was very dismissive and demanding answers. Peridot miraculously wasn't selling them out and wanted to show her ideas. However, Yellow Diamond disagreed for many unknown reasons until what was later learned in the series of why that was the case. And this is definitely where Peridot began to see her leader for who she truly is, someone who is very demanding and overbearing. And because of this, Peridot can no longer stand this horrible mental and emotional abuse, and finally standing up to Yellow Diamond, which wasn't easy for her, which is understandable. So, and calling her a cloud was probably the biggest, gutsiest move we have ever seen. Though it left her into a huge state of shock, which was passed on later into log date 7152. Again, I liked this episode because it showed a huge highlight in Peridot's character. Not only she didn't sell out the crystal gems, but she also showed of how much she changed from being the robotic Dorito into a lovable crystal gem. And I hope to see her more in season 6. And that's all I have to say about that. See you next time, Steven Universe fans. And please share your opinions of your favorite season 2 episodes.